All right, we are going to continue on with the muscular system and get into the muscles that act at the shoulder joint, also known as the glenohumeral joint. Actually, there's a couple different joints there, but that's the major one. All right, now, admittedly, some of the muscles we're going to cover here, most of them are, the bulk of the muscle is found on the axial skeleton, but they can have attachments on bones of the appendicular skeleton, just for 100% disclosure on this. So like I said, there are the actual shoulder joint complex consists of several different joints. All right, one's called the sternoclavicular, and the names of the joints kind of tell you what two bones are being attached by that muscle. One is the sternum and the clavicle, so sternoclavicular joint right here. And if you're to feel right here, palpate on yourself while you elevate or shrug your shoulders, you'll feel the elevation and depression that takes place at that joint. You can also protract and retract at this joint, and you can feel the movement taking place. The other major joint here is called the glenohumeral joint, and that is a joint between the this is a model of the left arm, between the humerus, this bone right here, and how it fits into this little shallow depressed area on the scapula called the glenoid, or the glenoid cavity. So the head of the humerus fits in there like that. And then we can move our shoulder into all different kinds of directions at that glenohumeral joint. We can flex and extend, we can abduct and adduct, and there's also a medial or internal rotation or lateral/external rotation. And then there's another joint. It's not, the joint word here is in quotes because it's not a true joint. All right, your scapula, this is the anterior surface and posterior surface of the left scapula. It can slide across your posterior thorax during other shoulder movements. Right? So it can, again, when you shrug your shoulders, you can elevate the scapula, depress the scapula, protract, retract the scapula, as well as movements called upward and downward rotation. Now, upward and downward rotation, a little bit, I'm going to give you something, a quick and easy way to determine what's what. It refers to the direction that this glenoid cavity or glenoid fossa is facing. Okay, so in anatomical position, it's like facing laterally in order to receive the head of the humerus. If it pivots this way so that the glenoid is facing upward or superiorly, that's called upward rotation. If you move in such a way that the glenoid faces downward, pivots this way, well, that would be downward rotation of the scapula at this scapulothoracic joint. Excuse me. All right. So just like we did with the previous musculature, we're going to work our way, at the shoulder on the anterior side and then the posterior side. So I'm going to start off with the pectoral region, a couple of muscles found there, and then we'll move to a posterior view. All right. This region of the body is called the pectoral region, and they've got one really big muscle that's found in this region, big, pectoralis major. This is a really cool muscle. It's got two different heads. Right? There's what's called a sternal head and a clavicular head. The sternal head is what attaches to the sternum, along the sides of the sternum right here. And then right where there would be the sternoclavicular joint right there. This would be the clavicle. Here's that clavicular head of pectoralis major. Now these two heads combined, they originate medially and project laterally outward towards the sides. And as they do, there's something really cool that happens to this muscle. Right? And if you look closely, you can see it down here where the muscle fibers twist around themselves before they attach to your humerus. Okay, there's another muscle that does this called latissimus dorsi. We'll get there as well. All right, so if I come back to the humerus, right, here's an anterior view of your humerus. A little bit of review from Skeletal System 231. There are these two bumps on the proximal end of the humerus called the greater tubercle and the lesser tubercle. Right? And there's a little groove or a valley that runs between them. That's called the intertubercular sulcus. Sulcus is a groove, right? So this groove between the tubercles, intertubercular sulcus. Now you can see on this side, this is called the medial lip of that sulcus, and then on the other side is a lateral lip of that intertubercular sulcus. Pectoralis major, it actually attaches to that lateral, it sends all the way out and attaches to the lateral lip of that intertubercular sulcus. It extends out, twists around itself, and then attaches for full disclosure. And what you can do with this muscle, because it twists around, it gives it some pretty cool actions that it can do. It can, it all comes back, right, to how the muscle crosses the joint. And in this case, we're talking about the shoulder joint. Well, point of rotation at the glenohumeral joint is like right here, between the humeral head and the glenoid fossa of the scapula. Pectoralis major runs inferior to that. It runs below that point of rotation. Okay, so when you abduct at the shoulder, which is this movement here, abduction, you're stretching out pectoralis major, and it's going to build up that elastic recoil. And when you concentrically contract pectoralis major, it will pull on the sternum as well as the humerus. Sternum's not going anywhere. And that will cause this torque at the glenohumeral joint that will pull your arm closer to your body, which is called adduction. And both of them work together to produce adduction at the glenohumeral joint. They will also produce medial rotation. Right? So the head of the humerus fits in there. Medial rotation, the whole arm pivots inward or outward. That's internal or medial rotation, external or lateral rotation. The terms medial and internal mean the same thing in this case. The terms lateral and external are synonymous. They mean the same thing in this case. Due to the twisting action of the muscle, you do get some separation of function between the sternal and clavicular heads. Well, what can you say, man? The clavicular head, just based on how it's oriented, how it runs from up here to the inferior attachment on the lateral lip, when you contract that head of the muscle, it's going to flex the shoulder and bring your arm out in front of you. That's shoulder flexion. Right? Now, when you do that, it's actually going to stretch out the fibers of the sternal head. So from a flexed position, this pectoralis major, the sternal head, can extend the shoulder, which is just kind of weird that one muscle, same muscle, just different heads, can produce opposite actions, flexion and extension at the same joint. Now, if you were to feel, you've got to know what the axilla is. The axilla in the special notes, that's your armpit. It's known the axillary region. So if you palpate right here, right there at your anterior armpit or axilla, and then adduct at the shoulder, you'll feel your pectoralis major muscle just popping out, like contracting. Boom, that's what it does. You won't feel it if you abduct because it's not contracting. Right? So it forms that anterior border of your armpit. All right, now if you peeled away pectoralis major and looked deep to it, you'd find another muscle in this same region that's not as big, right? Still in the pectoral region, but smaller, pectoralis minor. And that is this one right here, pectoralis minor. It's got its origin right here on ribs 3, 4, and 5. And the fibers run superiorly, and they insert onto this piece of bone on the scapula called the coracoid process. Right, so, attaches your scapula to your ribs. The scapula on the posterior side of your body to your anterior ribs. So, what this can do when you contract it, it will protract. It will cause the scapula to basically slide this way, like around your back and forward anteriorly. And it can also, if these fibers contract, they pull towards each other. Depending on which end or which bones you have fixed using fixator or stabilizer muscles, you can either elevate the ribs. So this is a synergist muscle for respiration or inspiration. Or it can pull the coracoid process inferiorly, which will pull the entire scapula inferiorly, which is called depression of the scapula. All right. And then there's this kind of, large muscle that basically acts like a cuff. It covers the top of our shoulder joint, our glenohumeral joint. And it's called the deltoid muscle, and it's got different bellies to it, like a lot of different muscles. Some of the fibers of the deltoid cross anterior to the glenohumeral joint. Some of them run right over the top. Others run posterior to the point of rotation at the glenohumeral joint. So again, this same muscle, it can produce flexion, extension, hyperextension, as well as abduction at the shoulder joint, depending on which belly you contract. The anterior deltoid, that's going to flex the shoulder. Right? It originates right here from the lateral third of the clavicle. It inserts onto a little bump about halfway down your humerus called the deltoid tuberosity. All right, now the biceps brachii, I've kind of already talked about the biceps brachii a little bit, right? Biceps, two heads. Brachii, found in the brachial region of the body. All right, so you got a long head and a short head. Remember that intertubercular sulcus right there? The tendon of the long head of the biceps brachii muscle actually runs through that intertubercular sulcus. It's covered by the pectoralis major that's superficial to it, but the tendon of the long head runs right up. Hard to do it. I don't have enough hands. That's the problem. It runs right up through that intertubercular sulcus and attaches to a little bump just above, just superior to the glenoid fossa where the head fits in, called the supraglenoid tubercle. The other short head of biceps brachii originates here from the coracoid process, just like pectoralis minor, and just like the other muscle on the screen, coracobrachialis. They all have attachment points on the same spot, the coracoid process. Now, with the biceps brachii, those two heads merge together, the long and short head, and they collectively insert onto the radius. So here's the whole model here. Here's the humerus. Here's the radius and the ulna. The biceps brachii would cover this anterior portion and insert onto that little bump right there called the radial tuberosity. And there's a little offshoot of connective tissue of the tendon that will then wrap around the bone, the actual musculature, called the fibrous lacertus. And it helps further anchor the biceps brachii to the radius. All right, now biceps brachii, it acts at the shoulder. It also acts at the elbow. We'll bring it back when we talk about appendicular musculature. But right now at the shoulder, it is a shoulder flexor. At the elbow, it's a synergist for elbow flexion, but it is the primary muscle involved in supination. In anatomical position, you are supinated with your palms facing anteriorly or forward. Yeah. If they're pronated, then you would contract biceps brachii and it would pivot back over into supination. So there's, pronation, supination, pronation, supination. You can see the radius is the bone that moves during pronation and supination. The ulna does not move. It's locked into place. All right. So there's biceps brachii. All right, coracobrachialis, the name tells you what's up, right? It's in the brachial region. It's got its origin on the coracoid process, coraco part, but it extends out and inserts onto the anterior and medial side of the humerus, kind of proximally, and there's its functions there. Because it crosses anterior, it's going to flex, and because it crosses inferior to the point of rotation, it's going to pull that limb closer to the body when it contracts, which is adduction. All right, the posterior musculature. Wow, what's going on with this muscle? The trapezius. This is really cool. Again, you've got two of them. This is only showing one of them highlighted here and one of them over here. But there's obviously one on this side and the other side too. And because if you put, imagine that the other trapezius was shown in this image, it would create this kind of trapezoidal shape. Trapezius. Okay. And just like in a lot of other muscles, there are different muscle bellies. And they've been separated into 4 different muscle bellies, numbered from superior to inferior. So there's number 1 right there, number 2, number 3, and number 4. All 4 of these bellies are going to insert onto the scapula at different parts. Right? This one originates actually from that bump. If you feel on the back of your skull, you feel that little bump that sticks out. That's called your external occipital protuberance. And this ligament that runs up the posterior spinal column, that's called ligamentum nuchae. And 1 and 2 originate from those 2 features, either the external occipital protuberance or ligamentum nuchae. They both insert right here onto the clavicle, and when you contract number 1, this belly up here, you're gonna pull this part closer to this part. It could cause lateral flexion of the head at the neck, but if you fix the head in space, it will pull this lateral third of the clavicle this way, which is going to cause the glenoid cavity right here to kind of face upward. So that's going to produce upward rotation of the scapula. Same thing as number 2, right? Upward rotation. Number 1, number 2, as well as the 4th belly down here. It inserts onto the medial border of the spine, the scapular spine, that ridge of bone. If you pull it downward, it will also, I mean, if you pull, let's give you the posterior view. If you pull this part downward, it will cause upward rotation, cause this to face upward. Okay, now if you contract bellies 2 and 3 that have a more direct horizontal medial lateral attachment point, then it will simply pull the scapula toward your vertebral column, towards the middle of your back. And that sliding action of the scapulothoracic joint is called retraction. If it moved forward, that's protraction. If it moves back towards this way, retraction. Okay. So that's what these numbers are for. These numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, they are associated with the corresponding muscle bellies of the trapezius muscle, and here's the actions produced by each one of those bellies. All right, now trapezius basically covers most of the superior posterior thorax. Most of the inferior posterior thorax is covered by this muscle, called the latissimus dorsi. You will often, I'm sure you've heard of these muscles in referred to in their shorthand, like traps and pecs and abs and delts and lats. If you haven't, well, people do it. But latissimus dorsi is the proper term for the lats. This is known as the swimmer's muscle, weirdly enough, because if you do like I don't know what the stroke is. It's like maybe the crawl. I don't know. Freestyle, I think it's what it's called. This muscle plays a role in all of those. I mean, this is a muscle that will extend and hyperextend at the shoulder. It will produce medial rotation as well as adduction, pulling your arm closer towards the middle of your body, which is what you're doing if you're doing the freestyle swim stroke. People who swim a lot have very well developed latissimus dorsi muscles. Gives that kind of crazy V shape to their torso. This also has similarities with pectoralis major. Right? It's a very large muscle. It originates from the iliac crest over here, as well as this expansive connective tissue called the thoracolumbar fascia. And it covers most of the inferior lower back. It wraps around the side, and as it wraps around the side, you look right here, just like pectoralis major, the fibers, as they wrap around, they twist before they attach. And whereas pectoralis major attached to the lateral lip of the intertubercular sulcus on the humerus, latissimus dorsi attaches to the medial lip of that intertubercular sulcus. Right, so there's its job. It's going to extend and hyperextend, adduct, as well as rotate the humerus inward in a movement called medial rotation. And just like pectoralis major formed the anterior border of your armpit, the axilla, the posterior border is formed by this muscle. So they both will adduct, powerful adductors at the shoulder joint, even though they're on opposite sides of the body, or different front and back, anterior, posterior sides. All right, there's the anterior musculature. Now we're going to move into the posterior side. And again, I mentioned one of these already, which are the rhomboids, as stabilizer muscles, shown right here. There's actually two different rhomboids. There's a rhomboid major. By this point, you got to know major means big. All right, and then superior to it, there's another one, rhomboid minor. They attach along the medial border here of the scapula, and they attach also to the transverse processes. Spinous processes of your most inferior cervical vertebra and the first 5 thoracic vertebra. And again, they can retract the scapula, but they're also used as stabilizers during shoulder movements to prevent the scapula from just freely swinging around, from preventing unwanted upward and downward rotational movements of the scapula. Okay, let's see. And the other one, again, different muscle, but I think you can get a lot of what it does out of the name. Levator scapulae. It's going to elevate your scapula, right? It's got its origin right here from the transverse processes of some cervical vertebrae, and then extends down, and this little superior pointed part right here on the scapula is called the superior angle, and that's where levator scapulae attaches. And you can imagine here, if you fix the head in space, you contract levator scapulae, it's going to pull the scapula upward, which is elevation. All right, it can also cause some pivoting action, which would produce downward rotation. If you fix the scapula in space, but not the muscles of the head, then it can also produce lateral flexion of the head. Kind of crazy. All right. Serratus anterior, however you want to say it, I don't care. Whereas the latissimus dorsi was known as the swimmer's muscle, serratus anterior, it also has a little colloquial street name. It's known as the boxer's muscle, like people who punch things and people for a living, that kind of boxer. Because think about what you do. If you're trying to punch something, okay, I'm not suggesting you're a violent person or anything like that, but say, for example, you try to punch something. You're basically throwing your limb in front of your body. You're like propelling your limb forward. Well, serratus anterior is the muscle that does that. It produces protraction of the scapula. You look at where the origin of this muscle is, right here, 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 here. Ribs 1 through 8 all have different parts of serratus anterior. Right? All of these different origins, they merge together to form this one muscle that kind of wraps around your thorax, wraps around your rib cage, right? And then attaches to the underside, the deep part of the medial border of your scapula. Right? So if this were my scapula, my serratus anterior would wrap around it. underneath it and then attach right here on this side, the medial side. And if I contracted that muscle, it would protract. It would, not that far, obviously, but it would bring the scapula, cause it to slide along the side in an anterior direction. Right, so that would be protraction. One of the jobs of the serratus anterior is to prevent your scapula from just winging out, right? From the medial borders sticking out. It kind of holds those medial borders of your scapulae against your thorax. Prevent them from just, some people can voluntarily wing their scapulae. Looks kind of weird. If someone can do that and you're looking at them from behind when their shirt's off, you'll see their scapulae just kind of stick out. It's disconcerting, to say the least. But this is the muscle that prevents that by holding it tightly against our thorax. All right. There's that. We move on. So I kind of, again, already mentioned this. This is part of the deltoid. I mentioned the anterior deltoid already, right? Because the anterior deltoid can produce flexion movements at the shoulder. But the posterior deltoid right here, crossing posterior to the point of rotation, well, it's going to produce extension and hyperextension. And then this one right here that runs right over the top, basically just passes kind of wraps right over the top, runs in this direction, and then attaches to the deltoid tuberosity. Well, you think about what happens when when this muscle contracts, these 2 points get pulled closer together. This is going to get pulled that way, which is going to pull your arm away from your body, which is abduction. Right? So you got one muscle, the deltoid, flexes, extends, and abducts, depending upon which belly you contract. And whereas the anterior fibers would cause the medial or internal rotation, the posterior fibers would produce lateral or external rotation at the shoulder joint. All right. Get deep to the deltoid, and really on the scapula. This is gonna. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's gonna really depend on you understanding the anatomical landmarks of the scapula. There's just no way around it. All right. So here's a quick recap. All right. A smooth, depressed area of bone is typically called a fossa. This one right here, that's on the underside of the scapula, it's called the subscapular fossa. Subscapular fossa. It's a smooth, broad expanse of bone, and there's a muscle that originates here, shockingly enough, called subscapularis. Here's an anterior view. There's the muscle, and it extends outward, and the tendons of the subscapularis actually merge with the tendons of 3 other muscles, collectively called the rotator cuff muscles, which tells you, again, what these muscles do. They're going to rotate, right? But again, it all depends on where. How does it cross the joint? What kind of rotation is it going to produce? Well, if it's crossing on the underside, the subscapularis, it's going to attach to the anterior side of the humerus, and when it contracts, it's going to medially rotate that humerus at the shoulder joint. So here's the superior part of the scapula, a superior view of the scapula. But let's give a posterior view. Posterior first, I'm sorry. This one down here, there's a smooth expanse of bone, right? It's a fossa. There's one up here, another smooth expanse of bone. It's another fossa. They're separated by this feature right here called the spine, the scapular spine. So the one that's superior to the scapular spine, supraspinous fossa. And hey, guess what muscle you find there? Supraspinatus. Right? It will project laterally, merge with that common tendon that wraps around the head of the humerus and helps pull it in, hold it against the glenoid. And because it crosses right over the top of the humeral head, when it contracts, it will cause abduction. Actually, all abduction movements at the shoulder, they're initiated. They're all started by the supraspinatus. This one's shown right here. Once they get it started, the deltoid takes over, but it all begins with the supraspinatus. All right, two more. All right, so if this was the supraspinous fossa, well, this one that's inferior to the scapular spine, it would follow, logically anyway, that this would be called the infraspinous fossa because it's inferior to the scapular spine. Infraspinous fossa, there's the muscle that you'd find there, infraspinatus. Okay, same action. It's going to run laterally and attach to the humerus, and because it crosses posterior to the point of rotation, if I can get my cursor to work, posterior to the point of rotation, it's not going to medially rotate. It will laterally or externally rotate at the glenohumeral joint. All right, so believe it or not, those are the three of the four rotator cuff muscles that make the most sense in terms of their names. They're named after the feature to which they're attached. There is a fourth rotator cuff muscle that just doesn't make that kind of sense. It's called teres minor. Okay, and it's shown right here. It's got its origin right there on that lateral border of the scapula, and it's going to insert, just like with the other three muscles, right, onto the humerus. Teres actually means round. So you look at the muscle belly, this is kind of a rounded, cylindrical shaped muscle in cross section. So maybe that's where it gets its name, but it's a small one. There's actually another muscle called teres major, but it's not one of the rotator cuff muscles. We'll get into that later, next week. All right, but for now, four rotator cuff muscles: subscapularis, infraspinatus, supraspinatus, teres minor. And because they're all rotator cuff muscles, they're all going to produce rotation. If it's anterior, medial rotation. If it's posterior, lateral or external rotation. All right, so if you had to go through these and say you had to number these, all right, there's a superior view of the muscles of the rotator cuff. Superior view. There's the clavicle right there. All right, so number one, this is the scapula, right? And this little feature right here represents the scapular spine in gray, which makes this the acromion process. And there's the coracoid process. So that makes this muscle number one. It's the one muscle that's on the anterior side of the scapula, which has to be subscapularis. Number two, this muscle, well, this area is the supraspinous fossa, so that's got to make this the supraspinatus. Skip number three, move to number four, right? Just inferior to the scapular spine, infraspinatus, and there's the muscle coming out again and attaching, and then inferior to that, there's teres minor, number three, sneaking in. So, subscapularis, supraspinatus, teres minor, infraspinatus, 1 through 4. All right, I did mention there is this other muscle, right, called teres major. I said we're going to do it next week. Well, I was wrong. We're going to do it right now. Teres, round, bigger than teres minor, okay? Not a rotator cuff muscle. It still originates from the scapula, this inferior point called the inferior angle, but it just it projects, has a more lateral projection, and it actually inserts, it has a shared insertion with latissimus dorsi, right? Both of these attach to the medial lip of the intertubercular sulcus. Both of them are going to produce adduction. Both will produce medial rotation. Both will produce extension. So, basically anything latissimus dorsi can do at the shoulder joint, so can teres major. And lastly, finishing up here. So we covered the one of the muscles of the anterior brachial region, and that's biceps brachii. By the way, you must always include brachii when talking about either the biceps brachii or triceps brachii, because there's a muscle in your leg called biceps femoris. So if you just say, oh, this muscle's the biceps, I don't know whether you're talking about the arm or the leg. Right? So this is your warning. Do not just call muscles, oh, the biceps or the triceps. Brachii is there for a reason. It's part of the name. Right? So please if you just put biceps or triceps anywhere, it's going to be wrong. All right? Got to draw a line somewhere. There it is. Just like biceps brachii has 2 heads, biceps, triceps has 3. Triceps brachii has 3 heads. Only one of them has an action at the shoulder joint, though. Right? The only one, that's the long head. The lateral and medial heads, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on those, right? But their action is isolated to the elbow joint. This is the only muscle of the posterior upper arm, the only one there. So it's going to it's got a shared insertion onto a posterior view of the humerus. Okay, and here's the ulna. This little bony feature of the ulna is called the olecranon process, and that's where the tendons of your triceps brachii insert. Right? So if, say, the elbow is flexed, you're stretching out triceps brachii. If you contract that muscle, it's going to pull this olecranon process. It's going to produce rotation by pulling on the olecranon process that straightens the arm, and that movement is called elbow extension. That one long head, because it's posterior to the point of rotation at the shoulder, it will produce shoulder extension. So if you're trying to put all this together again, start number 1 through 5. Here's the scapula. There's the scapular spine. That makes number 1 the supraspinatus. That makes number 2 the infraspinatus. Number 3 is teres minor. Number 4, teres major. Number 5, deltoid. Number 6, triceps brachii. If you really want to go in depth, it's the long head of triceps brachii.